Welcome to the April meeting of Granville Schools Board of Education. If you're not standing already, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for joining us for our Board of Education meeting and for some wonderful commendations for many of our students. Brittany, if you'd start, Mrs. Triolo, with the roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Deeds? Here. Mr. Crum?
Here.
Ms. Shaw? Here.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
And just a reference that the agenda has an amendment and we're adding a student presentation with the other student presentation to it. So as amended.
As amended.
So moved. Second.
Roll, please.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Crum?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. All right, the first part of our agenda is the best part, the commendations. We have several student groups here, so Mr. Brown, if you lead us in that.
All you students are going to have to wait, but it's great to have all of our winter athletes here, so appreciate you being here. Because the first presentation, commendation, is from the Auditor of State's office, and so I'm going to introduce Scott Brown, who is no relationship to me at all. But hey, maybe, we can meet afterwards and find our lineage somewhere. But Scott is here to present our treasurer's office with an award.
Well, don't put me in front of the winter athletes. I have 2 winter athletes myself, so I know they don't get all the glory all the time.
That's right.
Yes, I am here this evening. It's my honor to be here to present this award on behalf of the state auditor, Keith Faber. The award is the Auditor of State Award with Distinction for Granville Exempted School District. This award puts your district into a very select group. Auditor Faber's office audits approximately 6,000 entities per year, and less than, okay,
Told me I had a plan.
Yeah.
and less than 4% are eligible for this award. The Auditor of State Award with Distinction is presented to local governments and school districts upon the completion of a financial audit that meet these criteria to be considered a clean audit report. The entity must file financial reports with the Auditor of State's office by a statutory due date without extension on a GAAP accounting basis and prepare comprehensive annual financial report. The audit report does not contain any findings for recovery, any material citations, any material weaknesses, any significant deficiencies, uniform guidance findings, or question costs. Additionally, the management letter contains no comments related to ethic referrals, questions, costs less than the threshold amount, lack of timely report submissions, bank reconciliations, it goes on. It's a very thorough audit, by the way. Failure to obtain a timely single audit, findings for recovery less than $500, public meetings or public records issues. The entity has no financial or other concerns. This award represents the hard work of all school employees and financial staff who make every effort each day to attain accounting excellence. I want to recognize the board members and Superintendent Jeff Brown that have done an outstanding job watching over every dollar. I specifically want to recognize your treasurer, Brittany Triolo. I was going too fast, sorry, Brittany. For her leadership and professionalism and exceptional commitment to financial integrity. Congratulations, Brittany. On behalf of State Auditor Keith Faber, I'd like to present the Granville Exempted School District with the Auditor of State Award with Distinction.
Yes, she gets a pin. And I have to say, beyond those comments that were just made, most people don't realize that she operated short-staffed all year. So she had probably double, if not triple, the work to accomplish that task. So kudos to you and your colleagues. So thank you. All right, now, indoor track. Where are you guys? You're everywhere. Okay, excellent. Congratulations are in order for several GHS athletes for placement at the state indoor track meet held on March 4th in Geneva, Ohio at the Spire Institute. State placers, senior Lillian Eccles was the state runner-up in the 800 with a time of 2 minutes and 15 seconds. I can't get to the refrigerator and back in that much time, but great job, Lily. Freshman Charlotte Turner, sophomore Avery Ogg, junior Catriona Sproul, and senior Lillian Eccles were state runner-up in the 4x400 with a time of 4:01. Sophomore Nora Carrington was third in the triple jump with a new school record of 36 feet, 4.25 inches. That's pretty impressive. Senior Chris Barker was fifth in the 200 with a time of 22 seconds. That's pretty fast. Sophomore Lane Hannah, Cohen Stump, junior Owen Kirkham, and senior Eli Ketchmar was seventh in the 4x800 relay and a new school record of 7 minutes and 59 seconds. That's pretty impressive. Other qualifiers, we had a sophomore, Megan Kaminsky, high jump, ninth place. Sophomore, Lane Hannas, Owen, Kirkham, and Eli, and Chris. In the 4x400, placed 14th. Senior Ella Johnson, 3,200, which is a grind. Where is she? Yeah, that's a long race. 19th. Sophomore, Sophia Poling, junior Kara Bergeron, seniors Ariel Larson and Sophia Kotz, 4x800, 20th place. Freshman, Mila Teeters, triple jump. Malia Teeters, thank you. 22nd place. And junior JJ Hero was supposed to participate in the triple jump but was injured. So, indoor track. Congratulations. If I called your name, or if I didn't call your name and you're part of the indoor track, come on up and we're going to get some pictures and pass out some pins. Congratulations. All right, Mr. Burnett, will you take some pictures? Now, these guys probably all just got showered up from, your outdoor track practice, correct? Okay, so I can jump in and not fall over.
Coach.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, where? Yeah.
These camera shots.
All the parents are. And none of that happens without our dedicated coaching staff, and I see Chris Carr over here, so thank you very much. We appreciate that. Their work. Okay, next is Granville Swimming. Where are you guys? Okay, on the steps. Great. The 2022-23 season for Granville Swimming was an exceptional season. The team's competition schedule was able to return to a much more normal cadence because of the additional COVID restrictions being lifted. The girls' team, led by senior captains Caroline Otter and Carmen Wells and coach Hillary Paulson, finished 14-2 in the regular season, only being defeated by Upper Arlington and Dover. By the way, Upper Arlington's pool is ridiculous if you haven't seen it. It's like college level. It's sad, but true. The boys team, led by senior captains Joshua Remlinger and Jacob Teeter and coach Tyler Paulson, finished 12-4 in the regular season, falling short to Upper Arlington, Olentangy, Dover, and Columbus Academy. Assistant coach Hannah Sturgeon supported both teams throughout the season. Moving into postseason, the girls team won the Licking County League Championship for the second consecutive year, and coach Hillary Paulson was named LCL Coach of the Year. Where is Hillary? Woo! Oh, there you are. The boys team won the LCL Championship for the third consecutive year. Granville broke 8 league records during the meet and had 3 LCL swimmers of the year: Hannah Harden, Joshua Remlinger, and Jacob Teeters. So congratulations to those swimmers of the year. Let's give them a round. Ten swimmers advanced to the district meet, Division II state tournament, competing in 14 events, 10 individuals, and 4 relays. All 10 swimmers qualified for state finals and earned all Ohio honors. Hannah Harden competed the 50 and 100 freestyle individually, where she finished 10th and 9th respectively. Brooke Lemire competed in the 200 and 500 freestyle individually, where she finished 28th and 32nd. Lydia Sturgeon competed in the 200 freestyle and 100 backstroke individually, where she finished 12th and 17th, respectively. The girls' 200 medley relay comprised of Lydia Sturgeon, Grace Largent, Brooke Lemire, and Hannah Harden finished 7th. And the girls' 400 freestyle relay comprised of Brooke Lemire, Caroline Otter, Lydia Sturgeon, and Hannah Harden finished 6th. Joshua Remlinger competed in the 200 freestyle and 100 butterfly individually, where he finished 26th and 27th respectively. And Jacob Peter competed in the 100 breaststroke individually, where he finished 24th. And Nolan Schneider competed in the 500 freestyle individually, where he finished 17th. The boys' 200 freestyle relay comprised of Jacob Peters, Nolan Schneider, Dakota Balajaran, thank you. And Joshua Remlinger finished 9th. The boys' 400 freestyle relay comprised of Nolan Schneider, Miles Baker, Jacob Peters, and Joshua Remlinger finished 14th. The girls' team finished a notable 10th place in the state, the highest place achieved since 2015. Congratulations to all my swimmers. If you're here, come on up so we can get everything. They've done this before. One other thing that I'd like to say about this swim team, there were a lot of teams impacted by COVID, but this team specifically not having a place to swim or having to drive a lot of different places to get pool time, they really showed a lot of dedication. And I know that a lot of them as seniors, had some losses throughout that process, and you recovered well, and congratulations. Life is about recovery. So you demonstrated that very well through this process, so congratulations. We've got some talented kids, don't we? It's pretty amazing. All right, our GHS wrestlers, where are they? All right, there we are. All right, so we had our state qualifier, Peyton Costa, made his 2nd consecutive trip to the OHSAA state championship. Peyton has a career record of 81 and 30. He is a 2-time league champion, 2-time sectional champion, and 2-time state qualifier. Peyton was also a tournament champion this season at the Steve Stahl Memorial or Granville Invitational and the Logan Elm Invitational. He was also the captain on the team. Next season, Peyton has the opportunity to become only the 4th wrestler in Granville school history to qualify for the state tournament 3 times. So I know that we're all wishing you luck next year. Additionally, the Blue Aces have 3 state alternates in Andy Sanchez, Keegan Finley, and Ian Rutherford. Andy is a 2-time district qualifier. His season record was 34 and 15 with 15 pins. This season, Andy was a league champion as well as a Steve Stahl Memorial champion. Keegan Finley was also a team captain. He had 38 wins that led the team. He was 2nd on the team in pins with 24. He was a tournament champion at both the Steve Stahl Memorial and the Logan Elm Invitational. Ian Rutherford led the team with pins this season with 27 pins. He was one of only 4 Blue Ace wrestlers this season to reach 30 wins. He was a tournament runner-up 2 times at the Big Walnut Invitational and the Logan Elm Invitational. And we have their coach, Kyle Bergeron, here in the audience as well. So wrestlers, congratulations, come on up. I think you should put Coach in a full Nelson. Do you like that? Just kidding. Are we good? I knew that little wrestling joke because my dad was a wrestling coach for 20 years in Euclid City Schools, and that's why I played hockey. So, all right, that concludes.
Jeff, do we recognize the competition cheerleaders as well? Maybe that
So
goes-
the competition cheerleaders had to push to the next meeting, so they're not here tonight. So their coach notified us just before the meeting. Oh, okay. So that concludes our accommodations for tonight. We do have 2 riveting student presentations and the monthly financial report
My favorite.
that are fantastic if you want to stay. However, we know that you typically like to exit at this time. All right.
Let's go get Snickers.
Hey, see you everywhere these days. I think like you're doing it.
Probably would. I gotta sit in the back row in the church. I'm gonna get
Okay, so I think with the adjustment to the agenda, what we'd like to do is invite the students that participated in the Martha Holden Jennings Foundation first to come up and share their experience through that process, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to have the GHS students from Mr. Redding's class coming up and talking about the, is it anaerobic or aerobic digester? Aerobic, and there's a difference. And I'm expecting you to explain it. Okay, fantastic. So you'll go second, and then we'll have the monthly financial report. So the students here to present for the Martha Holden Jennings student presentation.
We're here.
Okay, come on up. Come on up.
Raise the roof.
So what I will do is you guys can stand right here and use this speaker to share your feedback to the board. Come on up. Don't be shy. So let me give you a little intro. So at the beginning of this year, Dr. Mike Nicholson, who's in the back, and Dr. Brad Mitchell, who's also in the back, actually, Dr. Mitchell was one of my professors.
I'm sorry.
About 20 some years ago. So in my master's work at Ohio State. So great to have you here, Dr. Mitchell. So we partnered with those 2 individuals to work with 3 other school districts to have a conversation about self-directed learning and self-determined learning. And we wanted to have student voice at the center of that conversation. And so those two individuals facilitated conversations across multiple school districts, and I'd like our students to share their experience and some of their feedback that they'd like to share with the board as information to consider. How's that for a lead-in?
That sounds perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Well, first we want to thank you for having us. We really appreciate being able to talk to you guys about this. It's something we've become very passionate about over the last couple of months. So we want to share some of our ideas and experiences with you today. So I guess it starts off where a couple of months ago, I guess in the fall, it was Mr. Hinton and Mrs. Ormond reached out to us and about 4 other students asking if we wanted to participate in a group that would be discussing student autonomy. And to be honest, I didn't know what that meant at first, but they promised there would be donuts. And we had about 4 meetings where we talked about basically how we wanted to change our schools to be more what students look for rather than maybe what an administrative person would see and hope that students would get out of it. So it started off just kind of spitballing a lot of ideas. We talked about experiences we had enjoyed in school, experiences that maybe called it stress or anxiety, and we narrowed it down to the things we thought we could change within our school district in a more reasonable way that could really influence the joy kids find in learning while also keeping some of the rigidness that is obviously a part of schools that you don't determine but state could determine. And so we ended up coming down to 3 main ideas that we think we can implement into school districts. I think you all got a copy of like a sheet with some of those on there. So I guess we'll just go over those and kind of our thoughts on those and what conclusions we came to.
Hello, so I'm Emery Johnson. I was one of the members of our group that had an opportunity to participate in our student agency conversations. So our first, and I would kind of argue main point that we came up with as a group was that testing is not a measure of a student, especially a student as a whole. We feel that there's so much more that students can do to showcase their learning, whether that's through projects or presentations. We felt that it's important to both incorporate other styles of learning into our daily curriculum. So while we think that testing is important, in some ways we think that it's also necessary that we incorporate that flexibility into daily school days, and that will in turn help with the success of our students, and also just allow students that maybe that's not their comfort zone to take a test to also blossom and get everything out of school that they're supposed to.
So, hi, my name is Alina Katz. I'm a freshman. So the second point we talked about was really failing and the pressures that students feel when they fail or when they have the opportunity to fail. So we were talking about how testing does place a lot of pressure on kids, especially like it's a pass-fail sort of thing. It's like either you get a good grade or you don't. And we were talking about different ways to test students, and those might not necessarily be like pass-fail, depending on the perfect outcome. So by figuring out a way to allow students to take risks and explore their curiosities, while still like making a learning experience and meeting state standards, obviously, we need to change it a little bit so that students have less of a sink or swim mentality and more of an opportunity for growth and self-reflection.
Hello, I want to say thank you all for allowing me to come here today. My name is Louis Calic, I'm a senior, and I'll be touching a little bit on the failure sink and swim method. Rather than viewing failure as kind of almost a downfall, it can be viewed as a learning growth and being able to be self-reflection and what you can take out of it rather than getting down on yourself and kind of getting the mentality of not being able to push through and success. Another good way to view the sink or swim method would be to say, like in a school environment, say you fail a test, rather than viewing it as a failing opportunity, you can view it as a learning opportunity and get new methods from this learning opportunity.
I'm James. I'm the only 7th grader here. I'm not the best at this, but I'll give it a shot. I'm kind of going to talk about how cookie cutter classrooms are like rigid and don't always make the best learning environment for students, and how teachers could demonstrate to students that mistakes are common and that even they make mistakes in their daily life, and how it's not like the worst thing that can happen, like making a mistake, like getting 2 points off a test. And it can also help with school offering like more stress management and supporting them by being able to manage their workload easier by maybe extending a due date by a couple days if they had a practice that night or something they had to do with their family. They could also do like real world projects and go through designing and thinking about all of the different things they could do and making mistakes and then learning from those to better the project or work.
Hi, I'm Ben, I'm a freshman, and I'm going to kind of talk about how tests kind of influence this sink or swim mentality as well as the cookie cutter classrooms. So one thing we stress a lot about is how tests, they don't measure a student. That's because students are all unique and they should all be given an opportunity to show how they are different. And we feel as though tests don't give students that opportunity because they are all, for the most part, the same. The other thing that tests kind of pose on students is what we talked about earlier, the sink or swim mentality, where if you feel like you're going into a test and maybe it's huge, it could impact your grade for the entire year, and maybe like a person like me, I get a lot of stress going into that, and I feel as though that affects my test taking abilities to a point where maybe it doesn't totally measure my growth and understanding of the concepts that are on the test as a student. And we feel like there are other ways that we can kind of stress to students that maybe tests, well, there are other ways to show growth, and that tests don't need to be the only way to kind of sum up the student as a whole. And also going back to the cookie cutter classrooms is kind of stressed upon the sort of how tests are, like I said earlier, pretty much the same, and how maybe one student excels at their test taking abilities, but maybe another student is equally as smart or gifted in the matter, but maybe just all the psychological stresses that tests pose maybe affect their grade or how they do on the test, and we feel like that's not fair to the student. So our solutions that we mentioned, I'm sure you've seen a few of them, are just different alternatives to tests, such as like projects or maybe studies extracurricular. Well, that's not right. Just different ways that we can show a student that they are achieving what they are hoping to achieve in different ways of tests.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of what we were talking about, this is another of my points, and I don't know if my students agree with me, but a lot of it boils down to a lot of high school prepares us for life and kind of gives us that idea that there are a lot of ways you want to push yourself in what you're doing, but a lot of it also boils down to the fact that we are still kids who like to do extracurriculars and spend time outside of the classroom. And I think that a lot of what we're doing kind of boils down to finding that balance between measuring our worth, preparing us for whether it be college or going into the job force or workforce, but while also balancing that with flexibility in our classrooms and relationships. A lot of my favorite classes have been because of great projects or because of great teachers, and less about great content and what I got on my test at the end of the year. And I think that that is a really important part about what we wanted to focus on. And I guess my other point is I think it's really important that we were brought into this. I really appreciate that we were reached out to as students and that you mentioned that student voice is important, because we are obviously all from different classes, different academic backgrounds, different extracurriculars, different grades. And I think that if nothing else, we all kind of learn through this experience how important it is to hear from different people with different experiences and different say in the matter, rather than just administration or a couple students who maybe have very specific experiences. I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to add.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have any questions for us about what we talked about, we're more than willing to talk to you, because this is a discussion we're really passionate about and would love to keep open amongst you and teachers and everyone else in the school. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Stay up there. First of all, I'd like to compliment you for your presentation, but also, it does take a little bit of agency to do what you just did. So learning about agency is really everything that a parent wants is for you to develop skill sets and apply them and generalize them and transfer them to life so that you can move out of their house and become self-sufficient. And that's really what agency is all about. And if we don't give you opportunities to demonstrate autonomy and control over your learning and develop that curiosity in our students, then at some level we're not preparing them for life. And our mission is learning for life. And so part of that mission is a general curiosity about what we do as educators. And so that process of continuous improvement led us to these conversations. And it's important to realize that we're not perfect either. And we're always refining our craft as educators to better meet your needs. When I was growing up, content was you looked in an encyclopedia and opened it up and found it and it was stagnant. That's not the way of the world anymore. When I graduated college, there was one computer on campus. Okay? There were no cell phones. So the world has changed, and we as educational entities have to change and evolve to meet your needs as well. And I think the most important thing is that your voice is key through that process. And you've demonstrated tonight, and I think we'll probably hear more demonstration in a minute from another student group, that kids should walk out of their K-12 experience empowered to go and impact the world in positive ways. That's what we ultimately want to see happen. And if we aren't doing that to the best of our ability, then we need to make changes and adjustments to the times that you're going to be living in. So you've given us some food for thought. I would love for you to talk to our representatives who create the state assessment system, because I think you would be very compelling in talking about what matters most to you as students. So thank you, and I would defer to any questions that the board might have.
So thank you so much. You guys were amazing. I'm just curious, are these conversations you're also then going out and having with other peers that aren't a part of this group, or did it just remain within the group for now?
So from personal experience, I have a brother who has an IEP. So I get to see every single day how testing is a struggle for him, and I get to see also just how some typical learning styles, like we talked about, cookie cutter classrooms, are really challenging for him, not only to get the education he needs, but also just to feel confident in himself. So I think that was a big thing for me when I got this invitation to join this group. I immediately went to that. I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want to focus on, and that's one thing that I felt really strongly about. So obviously my brother, he's a freshman, so he is a peer also, but I also have friends who feel the same way, and so yeah, to answer your question, I have talked to them about it.
And definitely in the time leading up to exams and finals and midterms, I talked to a lot of people and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, I have so much work to do. And I feel like that's something that's caused because of the nature of the test. It's okay, we have this one shot and that's determining 50% of our grade for the year. So I feel like if it was more something you could develop as you go, a different testing style that works for different people, it would be a better representation of what the student learned. And that's overall, I feel like what I'm thinking.
This is some great stuff. I just really appreciate you coming and sharing this and so forth. I have a little question about the process, right? To kind of see some of the things you're talking about are not the way we've done things in the past. And I wonder what that reception has been like and whether you feel like your voice has truly been heard, right? And also whether you think there's actionable steps to move forward that have been well received and so forth. So can you speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Miller, for your question.
Well played.
So yeah, I think there's a lot, and I think there is a lot to say about Granville Schools, where this is not a new idea in the school necessarily. I just think we have a very new take on it, or a different take on it than maybe you have come across. I know there are a lot of teachers, Mr. Redding sitting right here, so I want to start him a little compliment. His class is a great example of the students here tonight, of students taking action in what they care about. And I think that's something we are trying to kind of promote through our idea of destigmatizing testing. In the sense of action items, we understand that there's a lot that we don't understand on student body of what you put into this and the amount of work you have to put into meeting regulations. I think a lot of what we talked about kind of leads back to the idea of flexibility. There's a lot of idea that teachers have deadlines to meet. You see a lot in AP classrooms, there's an AP test you have to make. And I don't know how that looks on your half or on the teacher's half, but I think knowing that students, this is something we do care about and we do want to change is the first step in getting teachers more passionate. We're very lucky to have teachers that do care about meeting their students' needs. And so I think as we make these voices more heard, this will become an action that we can act upon. I know that I believe Mrs. Orman went to a conference where she talked about some of these things, and a lot of other administration, our advisor here is very passionate about it as well, so I think there are a lot of good groups getting involved with this. And I think we have a couple items listed on here that may seem vague at first, but I think these general mindsets are going to put us in the right direction. While they may not be direct action items, thinking in this mindset rather than thinking in the way we have thought is going to push us towards finding these ways we can accomplish our goals.
Very well said.
One last question for the group here, if I could. Were there any curriculum or classes you thought would benefit more from the self-directed learning versus others? Would you start with any classes first versus others?
I feel like this applies more in like science classrooms because you can do things like research and STEM-based projects more than places like history. But for things like the humanities, I feel like it would be easier to do some sort of like presentation or combination, like a writing piece or something that in the end instead of like asking questions about like the analysis of a passage.
That's great.
I will say, I think we're very lucky at Granville that a lot of our classes already do go very well in depth, especially AP, which I think has been super beneficial as a student on the receiving end of that. I do think like we get a lot of really useful information out of our classes that is really helpful and does give you some, definitely like would allow for the more in-depth like research and the student choice.
And then this is a little more generic than we were talking about, but we had a lot of middle schoolers in our group as well. And what they talked about is starting younger. We see in high school you get a lot of choice. Like when you're a senior, you can either load yourself up with as many classes as you want, you can only take humanities or arts, you have that choice. But when you're in middle school, specifically because we were talking to middle schoolers, it's a difficult period where you're trying to push yourself to get to that high school academic level, but you still feel like you're kind of stuck in a like direct path. And while a lot of those things are important, you need to have the baseline for high school classes. The idea of bringing some of this to the younger levels as well, just to kind of encourage that, like, I guess, being a kid mindset and being allowed to have things that are more important to you than the stress of your classes. I guess in more of a generic way, those would be another class that could really benefit for this would be younger grade levels.
And thank you for recognizing the work that has occurred prior. Project-based learning, the experiential learning class, mastermind class at the middle school. We actually have quite a few credit flex opportunities for students as well. If they're truly passionate about a topic and they get a teacher to sign off, they can do credit flex. So we've tried, the Portrait of a Graduate has started to articulate a different definition of success. And our teachers have really seen the benefit of, turning over some of that control and that autonomy and agency to the students because there's a teacher benefit to it too. They want to see you succeed differently as well. So there's a mutual benefit to doing more of this work collectively. So thank you. Great job. So next, I'd like to invite our next student presentation up to the podium. You have a PowerPoint? I think Mr. Welker can probably help you out. Yes, we have kind of expect that. So as they are getting set up, as you know, we typically hear once or twice a year from the students in Mr. Redding's class. We've had goats introduced at the land lab. We've had multiple phases of the land lab. We've had different students talking about pollutants in the environment. So this is another opportunity for our students to take action and talk about something that they're passionate about. So, I think I filled just enough time for you.
And we're having a little bit of computer.
Okay?
Sorry.
That's all right. And don't turn off your PC.
Thank you. I can start talking and we can wait on the. Okay. All right.
All right, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's not ready for this. Sorry, guys.
What do you say about it? Yeah, I know.
What was there? Sorry.
You're doing fine.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. We are students in Ms. Redding's Safety and Bio class. My name is Casey Lofbaum. I'm Lindy Van Horn. I'm Allie Messer. I'm Eliza Fruits. So, as Mr. Bauer already mentioned, we all do. Oh. You know what? It's fine. We don't need it yet. So we all do take action projects about something that we're passionate about. And for our project, we looked at food waste and trash in general, which is super exciting. But we noticed that 40% of food waste in America goes to landfill. And we were like, that number is really high. So that led to our idea. And we just want to say that we're really excited about it. We love this project. And we thank you so much for the chance to talk to you about it. So I'll let Lindsay introduce the machine.
So an aerobic digester is characterized as a process in which organic material is converted into fertilizer that contains a very high concentrate of nitrate, phosphate, and carbon. It is a closed machine and takes 24 hours for the conversion. The machine that we'll be potentially be putting in the school is approximately 3 feet and 8 inches in height, 3 feet in width, and then 6 feet and 7 inches in length. So the picture on the left is just an example of what the food waste would look like when we put it into the aerobic digester. The picture on the far left is the aerobic digester that we'll be putting into the school. And then there's just the fertilizer coming out. So at the end of each school lunch, we would take the collected food waste and put it into the machine. Now, although it works for 24 hours straight, we can open it up and put in more food waste in as needed. At some point after the lunches, one of us or another student from a future Take Action project will allow the machine to release the fertilizer, which takes only about 15 minutes. Then that fertilizer can be used for many different things.
Yes.
So this is the proposed location that we have for you all. In the packet that we handed out, there's a map of the commons. So if you look at the commons and you're staring at the big glass windows, to the right there's a storage unit, which is where all of these pictures were taken. So the picture in the top right, in that back corner, right below the vent, that would be the ideal location for the digester because the vent is directly above it, so it would save us some costs for the venting. And then there's also a power source located in the room, but we would need to run additional electricity through the kitchen. The best part about this location is that it is directly in the midst of all of our student activity. The Commons hosts a lot of certain things, and especially lunch, but there would be a lot of interaction from our students, which is the main goal for this project.
So we met with Chief Curtis and we got approval for the digester.
The next challenge we had to figure out was how much waste we accumulated as a school. So what we did was we got 2 trash cans and labeled them trash and food waste. So for 3 periods of 6-period lunch, we figured out how much waste we generated during that time period. And with the numbers that we knew of how many kids were eating during that period, we figured out how many total students in the high school, what we all were contributing to the waste, plus a 1 period of middle school, which when we figured it out, it was 78 pounds of food waste per day from the students and 26 pounds for a kitchen. So in total, it's approximately 100 pounds per day from everyone that's eating in that cafeteria. The actual digester has a capacity of about 400 pounds, which leaves lots of room for outside additional food scraps from local businesses or contributors. And as you know, there are many businesses that are moving into the area, so there's lots of room for our district to grow. So the wiggle room kind of here is going to be good for that reason. Okay. So the 5 senses. The first one is smell. One of the issues addressed in our last meeting was if the machine was going to smell or not. So in the room, there would be buckets of the food scraps waiting to be composted, but as long as we're upkeeping it, because the machine does run 24/7, as long as we're upkeeping what we're putting into the machine, the buckets won't be there long enough to create a smell. The machine is also completely enclosed when it's run, so no smell should escape the machine. It's also really, really hot in the machine, and so what it does is it kills bacteria, and bacteria is what makes rotten food smell. So there wouldn't really be a stench coming from it. The second one is hearing. There was a lot of problems with whether or not this was going to be a distraction in the cafeteria, just because we have a lot of events there, so we didn't want anything too loud or disruptive. But the machine can be compared to a refrigerator, so it's going to be more like a small hum, so it really wouldn't be noticeable, especially in a room of noisy kids. Touch and see go hand in hand because our ultimate goal is to make the GHS as sustainable as possible. What we want to do is get kids interacting with the machine as much as possible and be as familiar with it as possible. Because if they're familiar with it, we're hoping it'll inspire future generations to continue what we set out to do by making the earth green again. And our last one is taste. The fertilizer that is produced from this machine is going to be used in our greenhouses and our gardens. And a lot of the food that we serve in the cafeteria actually comes straight from our greenhouses and our gardens. So with higher soil quality comes higher food quality. So the students themselves are going to be tasting a difference in the cafeteria.
So there are a lot of other benefits beyond what Alex already mentioned. One of them being community service. We had a couple ideas for this. So first and foremost, students can be easily involved, like pretty much right off the bat. It's really easy to work with. It's kind of like a touch screen and a button. So students can kind of be directly hands-on involved with this. We also want to eventually allow community members to use it. So we were thinking members could come bring their food scraps to us and we could digest them with our extra space. We also wanted to include local businesses in that as well. It produces fertilizer, which is the raw product. You should have a bag of that somewhere. I think it's labeled. So that's the raw product that comes straight from the food. So the good thing about this is it's ours to use. So we can kind of decide how we want to use this, where we want to put it. We could put it in the in lab, which I'm sure Mr. Redding would like, the greenhouse, and the garden, all of that. It's ours to use, which is awesome. We also have a closed system. So this is more of like an ecology standpoint, but in a healthy, balanced ecosystem, you theoretically would have a closed loop, like a closed cycle. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. So kids are going to be eating, they're going to be contributing to waste, so then we'll digest it and we'll produce more fertilizer using that nutrients, which then goes back into their food. So it's like a big nutrient cycle, which is kind of
It's also sustainable. Landfills are not going to last forever. They're rapidly running out of space. A couple years ago, the tallest hill in Ohio almost became a landfill, which is kind of embarrassing, honestly. So this is a really good way to save resources while we can. This is also, I think, Granville is kind of a lighthouse school. We have a lot of influence over a lot of other places. I'm sure you guys know, you're a board of education. So I think that once we input something like this new technology, other schools can see it and be like, oh hey, this is a really cool idea. Maybe we should do this. And then that makes the impact even more notable. And then I think the most important aspect of this is the education. Students are going to be right there with the machine. They're going to be learning about, they're going to be learning about sustainability and composting right when they're eating lunch.
So obviously, student involvement is a really big part in this. I know many students in Granville apply for NHS and you need like 40 service hours. So this would be a way to get volunteer hours. You could spend your study hall or lunch just loading the digester. This is also a learning opportunity. Kids can not just read about the aerobic system in a textbook, they can actually see it happening and be involved in the system itself. They can also learn how to sort their trash into recycling, landfill waste, and food waste. I know a lot of colleges have started sorting their waste like this, and this can have kids learn and build these early habits. I know it was previously mentioned that future environmental classes can help with this. Key Club and Interact Club can also help with the volunteering if there's not enough volunteers on a specific day for out of the environmental classes. And also there's a possible fundraising opportunity in the future. We could have sports teams or the school itself sell their product to help offset the cost of the register.
So when the raw product comes out of the machine, it's hot with nutrients. I promise it's an actual term. But if you were to put this raw product on your gardens, everything would die because it's there's a lot of nutrients in it, which is a good thing, but that means it has to be mixed with other things so it doesn't kill everything immediately. So to make it usable, Earthpeak Organics has mixed it with some other things. First and foremost, they have Green Nourish, which is a plant fertilizer. As you can see up there, should be labeled on your bags. That was not currently available this spring, but it will be in the next year. So we don't have the prices for that. But they also have Repeat, which is a peat moss alternative. And if you know anything about peat moss, we're kind of trying to leave it in the ground because it helps to get carbon out of the atmosphere. So this is an alternative. We can still use peat moss for seed starters and things like that, but we can leave the actual peat moss where it should be. And then we have Remix, which is just a regular potting mix. We're versatile for gardening. And we think that will sell pretty well in a fundraiser because if you know anything about the baseball mulch fundraiser, that does really well and it's kind of along the same lines. So we were thinking that would be a really good option for some revenue.
So these are some current partnerships that we have been involved in. First, we want to thank Mr. Redding for initially starting us on this project, who connected us with Jeremy King, who works at Denison in the Sustainability Department. He connected us with Mr. George Vignani, who is sitting in the audience with you today. And so Lindy and I went and visited his actual digestion site in Dublin and saw the digester that we are pitching to you today. But while that was happening, Casey and Eliza were visiting Miss Doolin Smith at Dublin Jerome High School. And if you know anything about them, we have an anaerobic digester at their school. So we were kind of playing around with the idea of which one we wanted to go to. But if you don't know, anaerobic does not use oxygen, whereas aerobic does. And anaerobic produces methane gas, whereas aerobic produces fertilizer. So with some methane liability issues, we decided to steer towards fertilizer because we knew we could use that more productively here in Granville. So after we were connected with all of these fabulous people, we went and talked to Mr. Hinton, who is also in the audience, and we initially gained his support to now we're pitching to you. So some potential some potential fundraisers, or some potential partnerships that we're looking for is Alfie's. So if you don't know, they're located downtown, and their business is also devoted to making their own great again. So we want to get them involved by using their food waste scraps in the digester, as you mentioned that we have extra room for that. Another one would be Birdhaven Farms, because they're actually a supplier of a lot of our food here at Granville and other places like Snapshots, Alfie's, Denison, and more. So what we want to do with them is allow them to use some of the fertilizer that comes out of the machine for their crops, because that increases their crop quality, which also just comes right back to us since we get a lot of our food from them. But we'd like to mention that these are not the only possible potential partnerships for us in the future. There are lots of local businesses that we think we could get involved and kind of just unite the community as a whole with this project. Portrait of a graduate.
Way to go.
I figured you guys would like that one. All right, well, so we use these skills to help us succeed in this project along the way, and we're hoping that it inspires other students to use them as well. The first one is collaborative. We were collaborative because we were able to network with a multitude of different companies and staff members in the building. We also had to work really well together because at the beginning of this, we were simply classmates, but now we're pretty good friends who spent a lot of time on this project.
The next one is adaptable. So we had to change our meeting dates and times along with our original idea to make it more realistic for our school district. And students will have to be able to learn a new way or system of throwing out their waste.
As a whole, we've been responsible in completing and following through with our project, along with communicating with countless adults that have helped us along our way. And in the future, the students will have to be responsible in sorting their food waste from their trash.
We were also critical thinkers. We had to understand how the aerobic system works. And we also had to learn about the business side, school, and sustainability side of getting here today.
We have also had to be empathetic to many individuals that we've been in contact with. Their schedules have, many times their schedules have conflicted with ours, and we had to set meeting times. Another facet is that we have had to be empathetic with the people who came before us who basically ruined the environment.
We've also been resilient. So we talked about the whole anaerobic versus aerobic thing. We really thought it was a bad idea to have flammable gas on a high school campus. So we had to switch our ideas and bounce back from that. And also, we had to be resilient with technology because it's really hard. I don't know why it's so hard.
Okay, so the total cost of the aerobic digester machine itself is $49,997. And added addition to that is the electrical needed to power the aerobic digester, which is 3-phase 400 volts at 16 amps. Like mentioned before, we'll need to run electricity into the room from the kitchen panel. The amount needed for this is $2,850. Additionally, to keep the students accountable and knowledgeable about how to separate their food waste and trash, we'll need around $200 for trash cans and signage. Another aspect would be maintenance, which is free for the first year, but following that is $500 a quarter, which this is not required cost for us to pay, but we have the option if we would like it. Another thing is venting, but this could also, which the price for that would be minimal, about $200, but we could also cover this with our Take Action fund that Mr. Redding has. This brings the total to $52,847. Now that is a lot of money, honestly, but there are many ways that we can reduce the price. First things first is that there is a potential Ohio EPA grant that George Hunyadi has asked for, which would cut the price of the aerobic digester in half, meaning its worth is an estimated $25,000. Another 2 grants that we could possibly receive are from the Granville Education Foundation and the Granville Community Foundation, both estimated to be about $5,000 each, and we would be able to apply for these in the fall. The last 2 grant potentials are from the Kiwanis Club and the Rotary Club, which with our past history from the Take Action projects, could bring in $1,500 each, potentially. If we were to get all of these potential grants, the total of them would be $38,000. Now let's look at the long run. The aerobic digester has a confirmed life of 15 years, meaning that if we just decided to do so, we could take our raw product and With the help of Earthpeaks Organics, sell it. There are 3 options: a remix, a repeat, and a re-nourish, which we do not have the details on right now. But with the remix, which you can look at that, you have an example. We would buy the bags of fertilizer for around $6 from Earthpeaks Organics and sell them for $12, giving us a profit of $6 per bag. In 1 year, if we sold 100 bags, we would receive $600. If we sold 200 bags, we would receive $1,200, and so on. For the repeat, we would buy the bags for $8 from Earthpeaks Organics and sell them for $15 each, giving us a profit of $7 per bag. In 1 year, if we were to sell 100 bags, we would receive $700. If we sold 200 bags, we would receive $1,400, and so on. So if we were to sell both bags in 1 year, our profit would range from $1,300 to $3,900. This is per year. So with a life of 15 years confirmed, and if we were to do this fundraiser every single one of those years, we could make anything ranging from $19,500 to $58,000 total. This slide shows our calculations and the comparisons between our assets and liabilities.
So do we need to leave it up for a minute? So this is the why, like why we're doing this, why we care. And I think obviously the first bullet point is students. I'm presenting to a Board of Education, so that makes sense. But we think that this is going to be really, really helpful for our students. So I think back in 7th grade, we learned about composting, and they're like, oh, it's really hard. Like you need a bunch of people, you need to do a lot of maintenance, you can't put this in it, you get rats or it'll smell, and it's this whole thing. And then you're like, oh, that sounds like really difficult. But with this new innovative technology, it's not like that. And I think this is a really good way to teach students that this is a possibility, this is really helpful, and it's available. It's available to us, which is really exciting. So I think they've learned about it in theory, but they've never seen it. So this is a good way to get them to be able to lay eyes on it. We're trying to build kind of a culture here. I think the elementary school kids and the intermediate school kids can come to the machine. They can see it. They can, push little buttons. Like we can put fertilizer in their hands, so can't get much more hands-on than that. And we can kind of help them understand why we're doing this and why it's important. And then over the years, if they do it while they're young, they learn how to think about where their food comes from and where it goes, and they'll do that when they're older. So as they go through college and through life, they'll be able to make more of an impact that way. So this is teaching sustainable skills later in life. So our primary goal is to educate students the best we possibly can. And if we can do that in a way that helps the earth like this does, then I think that we have a moral and earthly responsibility to do so.
One of our last points is that it actually helps to improve the quality of the soil and the environment. Improving the soil means healthier plants, and our students will be getting healthier food in their cafeteria. It also helps to regulate the Earth's climate and stores more carbon. As we mentioned with the peat moss, it helps to store carbon, which is always a good thing, especially in today's world. Food scraps are going to landfills. Landfills will run out of space. They are not sustainable. And our job here is to do whatever we can to prevent that from happening. Lastly is our why. Why are we here, and why does it matter? Firstly, I like to point out, as a mostly famous Aldo Leopold said, sometimes it's about doing what's morally respectable. We all share a common passion for the environment, and saw our Take Action project as a chance for us to make an impact. Mr. Redding's class was the perfect opportunity to make our ideas a reality. We wanted to invest our time in a project that could potentially advance our school in a way to keep the earth green. But the underlying message is much more powerful. This project goes beyond a simple school assignment. Adults tell kids to get involved all the time. We are definitely involved and we are definitely active, but we need your support to show our peers that adults take our ideas seriously. We want to be role models for future generations, and we need your help to do so. Thank you for your consideration.
Is this where you pass around the hat? Oh, okay.
If you guys have any questions, we are more than happy to answer them.
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you done an analysis of how much food waste is accumulated at the elementary or intermediate?
We have not, no, because we were worried about the transportation between schools, because we knew that the high school and middle school was
located right where the digester would be. We were hoping that eventually that would also be an option, that we could do all the schools, but we didn't do an audit because of the whole thing. It'd be like a logistical nightmare for the time we did it in. But we are more than willing to explore that option. I think that'd be really, really awesome.
I would like, yeah, I'd like you to collect that data. That would be helpful.
Where will the raw material be stored? You know, like once it comes out of the digester, or
So we have like some room in that storage area that we can use for like storing for right now. And also Mr. Hunyadi has offered to store some of the raw product at his facility as well. Because it'll be used to mix into some of the fundraiser stuff. So we can also store it there. There's also probably room to store it at the greenhouse or in the gardens. So that would be an option for us.
It's nice that it's co-located really close there. This is fantastic, right? It's just really a great summary. You did a great job of answering most of my questions ahead of time and so forth. And I guess I mean, it's an investment, right? But it's an investment that supports a lot of our goals, which is good food, right? Great education and things like that. I'm especially encouraged that you've reached out and collaborated with so many different organizations, both from a grant and a support perspective, right? As well as from a kind of long-term operating, because I think there's probably enough food waste in Granville to fill this and more. And, I think Denison would be a great partner. I really like the idea of the other schools. And I just have a question a little bit about the logistics of operating. The students will be separating waste to feed it when it comes out. How much kind of operating labor is there, or what do you envision for how do I think about like what to do with this stuff? How much work that is?
So initially, like we talked about with the audit, we had 2 different trash cans. So we would probably try to do some sort of education on what we're doing and why we do it, just to encourage students to be more mindful of what they're throwing away. Because we actually had to stand next to the trash cans like during lunch.
We were dumpster diving.
Yeah, we were with gloves and everything. But so we were sort of like seeing over what was happening. So that's something that we want to make sure we don't actually have to do like during the school year, because that was not enjoyable. So that would be one of our biggest obstacles, would definitely be educating students on like making sure that they know why we're doing this and why it's important. So then we would take the food waste and we would probably store it on the loading dock. Well, no, we put it in the room. And then the machine runs 24/7, so we can constantly feed it as long as it's not at its capacity with 400 pounds, which wasn't really going to seem like a problem right now, unless we add more or whatever. But other than that, it's pretty simple to run. So we talked about like volunteer hours or legacy projects. Like in the upcoming years, there's other Take Action groups that can take on this project, and that can be their job. They can make sure they're upkeeping this and all those sorts of things. But as far as like the actual labor that's involved, it really shouldn't be too intense if everyone is kind of doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And do you know like an operating cost from an electrical power usage and so forth, and how that compares with the potential economics of selling compost?
Yes, so we do know that number. It is, I think, $4-ish a day. So we compared that to like a small space heater. So a space heater, if you were to run it all day, it'd be the same operating cost. So we should probably account that, but we didn't have it in the ROI, so we can account that in as well. I also wanted to mention one more thing with what Ali said. I forgot to mention this earlier, but there is a legacy part of this, like including the culture. So I think the more that we educate the younger ones on this, like I think there'll be 1 or 2 will get like a little spark of passion in them. And then as they grow up, they can kind of take this over, learn how to use it, and then carry that on later. So I'm hoping that, this won't fall on Mr. Redding. I think students, sorry, Ms. Redding. I think students will carry the torch, because I think we can get some, little children interested in this, hopefully early on, and as they grow up later.
Can I share one thing? So I do really think it's a cultural change. At the school I work at, I work with 5th and 6th graders, and I do 6th grade lunch duty. And this year, we have been asking students to, if they are not going to eat something that is an orange, individually packaged apples, to just put it in a container. And the kids are doing it on their own at this point. So I do think it's just a cultural change, and you would not have to be dumpster diving, maybe at first, but eventually it would be part of
part of just their every day. Thank you.
It doesn't sound like you'll have a shortage of volunteers at first, but I might suggest those who are tardy to class, or maybe freshmen. Is there a due date, a drop dead date that you would like the board to consider or make a decision on this?
No. I would say not necessarily, but our hope is to actually have the machine like by the next school year. But that would really be the only like time frame we're looking at. Other than that,
Yeah, we're aware of the like the levy and everything. I know the financial situation is a little sticky right now, so definitely no rush. We want to introduce the idea. We want to get you guys excited. We want to like open it up for consideration. But no, there's definitely no rush. Like take your time. I know the levy is kind of out of everyone's control, so totally no rush.
Have you applied, when you were talking about the grant and the different foundations and Rotary and Kiwanis, have you applied for any of those?
The one that we did not apply for it, but George Hunyadi, he has applied to the Ohio EPA grant. It was in March. That is the one that would cut the price of the aerobic digester in half, which would be $25,000. And then the Granville Community Foundation and the Granville Education Foundation, those two grants would be up in the fall. So it would not be automatic money right now. And Kiwanis and Rotary, we could get in contact with them right now if we wanted to.
And with Kiwanis, go higher. And I challenge all the Rotarians sitting at the table.
As a Rotarian, I may also suggest that.
Mr. Hunyadi, correct me if I'm wrong, but we should figure out if we received the EPA grant on June 1st.
Yeah, so the EPA makes a decision end of May, like around Memorial Day, should they tell you? And I actually had the Ohio EPA down for a tour, and I specifically mentioned Granville High School because I initially put the grant in January for Starbucks. And I said, you know, I'd like to substitute Granville High School. And they love the idea. And the one guy actually was holding a Starbucks at the time. He said it'd be better served, is the term he used, to have to be local. So I submitted an email Friday about subbing out. So, and we should be successful, but you never know. And the reason I say we should is because we just recently won a USDA grant. So I'm hoping the Ohio EPA knows this. So I'm hoping I say, well, goodness gracious, if the USDA can work with us, why can't you guys? But you know, got to be a little bit smoother, maybe.
Thank you. Yeah. One other thing that I'd like you to work on. So typically a return on investment over 15 years is a little bit long, especially if the lifespan of the equipment is 15 years. Try and figure out how to get that down to 5 to 10. So keep noodling on that.
Thank you.
This is fantastic. I really appreciate you coming and
Yes.
presenting. I learned a lot.
Thank you for having
Appreciate
us.
us.
Thank you, Rose, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get the dirt now.
Mrs. Allen. We need to put your breath in it.
You are welcome to excuse if you have other activities or homework to get to, but like I said, one of my favorite parts is the monthly financial update.
Yeah, there was. You think the financials?
I'm being advised to start, but half of our crew is missing, so I'll do that. Okay, so now that we have cleared the room, it's time for the March financial report.
I'm so excited I ran that.
Do you want to grab
Yes.
this? Okay, so first starting with our cash balance, and March was our property tax settlement month, so we're actually at a high point for cash for this fiscal year, and then we'll spend down from there through the rest of the fiscal year and into July. Once we receive the next cash settlement starting in August, we'll build back up again from there. So then, wanted to move, and I kind of switched up the slides a little bit to make the transition a little bit smoother. So since we're talking about cash balance, wanted to look at that on an annual basis as well. As a reminder, the blue line on this graph represents our maximum cash balance, and the yellow line is the minimum cash balance per our policy that we approved at the last meeting. And then the green line represents where we have been for 2018 through 22, and then 23 through 27, our projected ending cash for each year. So we are anticipating to be slightly above that maximum threshold for the current year, but then including the income tax renewal, we would stay right between those two lines through the forecasted period. However, the red line here represents what our cash balance would look like without the income tax renewal. So that would change starting in next fiscal year. We would start to lose revenue based on that income tax. And quickly, in 2 years, we would dip below the minimum threshold that we just passed. And then by the 2 years for this out, 26 and 27, we would actually be negative. So that is how our cash trends within the fiscal year and then also year to year. Yeah.
So why is it so important to have a minimum balance
Yeah.
as a school district?
So it's really important for any district, but it's especially important for Granville because of our 3 main revenue sources. So we have property tax, income tax, and state funding. And as we sit presently, all 3 of those sources of revenue are kind of in flux. So we have House Bill 1, which is potentially making changes to property tax and how that revenue would come in, and has the potential to reduce revenue there. The income tax is obviously up for renewal, so that has the potential to not continue beyond calendar 23. And then the state budget changes every 2 years. So when your revenue is in question, it's incredibly important to make sure that you have a cash balance to rely on to get you through those periods of time. It's also especially important for income tax districts because the income tax does adjust with the economic conditions of the community. That means it has the potential to decrease from year to year, unlike a property tax. So in those years where there might be a recession, for example, you'll want to have cash on hand to allow for maintaining your current expenditures, maintaining your current staff during those periods of economic downturn. So it's important it's important for those reasons, and then it's also just a matter of how schools are funded. So this is very common. All of these graphs are very common trends that you would see in a school district. You build cash up once, almost immediately following a levy. You build that cash up, spend down over time, because it's very hard to perfectly align your revenue that you're bringing in with your expenditures. We don't see growth due to inflation on property tax, whereas with 80% of our budget being salary and benefits, we obviously experience inflation on the expenditure side. So that is why it is so important to maintain that balance, that minimum cash balance specifically.
And I'm also thinking, like, what about just like on a day-to-day running of the schools? Why is it important to have those, those 90 days?
Yeah, and it's important for this reason as well, because you have fluctuations throughout the year. So we have high points, we have low points, but our expenditures are pretty even throughout the year. So we have payroll twice a month. We know what our utilities are about each month. So our expenditures come in pretty evenly throughout the year, whereas our revenue doesn't. So we have to have that cash on hand to be able to cover the points in January and June when we have lower cash, because our expenditures in those particular months are coming in higher than the revenue for those months. So you do have to have some degree of cash on hand as well, just to make payroll and pay bills, because a large majority of our revenue comes in twice a year with the property tax settlements. Thank you. Okay, so I can't remember if I showed this graph last time, but I've added some more detail here to show our history of days of operating cash on hand at the end of each fiscal year for about the last 20 years, and then highlighted different points of kind of what was going on in the landscape at different points. And then I've also added the forecasted years with and without the income tax renewal. So you can see this, it puts it in terms of days of cash on hand. That's what we passed for the policy, but it also is just more relatable terms. So looking at raw dollar values is kind of hard to understand in terms of our total budget. So that's why it's really important to consider what that equates to in terms of number of days that we can operate. So in the early 2000s, we were experiencing growth after having passed the levy. And then we passed a property tax in 2008, but almost immediately there was state funding reductions. So where you would normally see increasing cash during that period of time, that was offset by state funding cuts. So that's a little bit of an outlier there. But then in 2013 is really where you start to see it graphically, where we passed a property tax in 2013, built the cash up slightly, and then started to spend down again, and then passed the income tax in 2018, started collecting it in 2019, and then built that cash again back up to 23. We're expecting to end the year at about 170 days of cash. And then the two different colors for the forecasted year shows, the light gray shows what the days of cash would be, including the income tax renewal, and then the blue shows without. So again, you can see this, the same information really that we saw in the previous line with the lines going below zero. You can see that represented by the bars and the negative days that we would see in 26 and 27.
But I would also call your attention, just like you mentioned, from 2008 to 2012, there were 2 state reductions in that time period. So if you don't have cash on hand, you lose revenue from one of your revenue streams, and if you don't have that buffer from a cash perspective, you are turning around and potentially running, year after year levies to adjust for the revenue loss from one of your revenue streams. So, and I remember the revenue loss in 2010 because I came in 2011 and we almost immediately had to go through a reduction of about $1.5 million, which was half of the new money that the new levy was supposed to generate. If you remember, Amy, you probably recall. Thomas, you probably recall. So, just to make that earlier point more realistic for what has actually happened in Granville, that's a perfect example.
And a more recent example is having cash on hand to add 2 teachers really late in the hiring season because our kindergarten enrollment skyrocketed beyond projections. And having the cash on hand to be able to just go ahead and hire those teachers at the last minute allows us to be flexible and to accommodate that growth that we are seeing.
That's a great long-term chart that really shows kind of the levy cycle that we've talked about. I know in the past the board has always kind of tried to gear it so levies were about 5 years. And if you look at the last 50 years, we've had 10 incremental property tax levies that have managed to give us the inflational increase in our costs. And so that kind of 5-year cycle is what we're gearing for. And it's not exact, right? Because things like the state budget changes and so forth. But in the next 5 years, we don't have a property tax in the budget at all, right? Because if we continue with the income tax, that's gonna maintain the cash balance?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So because, if we assume the income tax is renewed and that will continue, the 5-year forecast does not show a need for a property tax during that time period. And the way that you can draw that conclusion really is that green line. So the green line is staying between our threshold there. So that's why that policy is so important, because it's really an indicator of when do we need a new levy, and it's when that green line dips below the minimum. So because we're anticipating or forecasting to stay in that threshold, that's really our indicator that we wouldn't need a new property tax in that time frame.
That's great.
Okay, so moving on to revenue for the month of March compared to last March. I mentioned the property tax settlement came in March. And the way the property tax settlement works is we usually get about 3 advance payments. Those vary in timing and size, so some of them come in February, some of them come in March. So comparison of that year over year for the month of March, we were actually down over prior year, but that's really a timing issue. And then state revenue, again, we talked about that. That's a timing issue of when the state funding formula was implemented last year. But then all of the revenue, and I'll touch on this, I have a couple of slides on investments at the end, but our investment earnings are up pretty significantly over prior year. So then revenue year to date, local taxes includes property tax and the income tax, and we do see a slight increase there. Some of that is the income tax, some of it is property tax, which we do see that annually. I've said property tax doesn't increase over time. It increases slightly due to the inside millage and new construction. So we would anticipate to see a slight increase there, but it is immaterial really when you look at that total line item. And then timing again of the state funding and advance payments for ESSER funds are what's driving the variances on the other 2 line items. Okay, well that looks weird. My fonts don't come across very nicely on this computer one. Okay, so I will try to articulate what this jumble of numbers is describing out here. But what this is intended to demonstrate, and all of this is on our website as well, so that's just a little bit of a plug for our website in general that I've spent a lot of time updating, so please go look at it and provide me with your feedback on what information is not there that you'd like to see, or that you love all of my graphs, or whatever. But all this is on there that you can see in a little bit more detail. So what we're showing here is the effect of House Bill 920. So as property taxes, or as property values increase with reappraisal, so for example in 23 we're going to have reappraisal in Licking County. And if property values were to increase by say 10% or 30%, what would happen is the millage, the effective millage that is applied to that valuation would decrease, so that what the school district receives in revenue stays about the same from year to year. The same is true for the impact on the taxpayer. So if an individual's value of their home goes up by 10%, they don't pay 10% more. Their millage, effective millage rate is reduced down, so what they're paying stays about the same from year to year. Again, there is a slight exception to that for the inside millage, but that's a small portion of our total millage. So this is again important really to understand, because it is still a majority of our operating revenue period. Even with the income tax, property tax remains our main source of revenue. So you can also see this reduction effect if you look at, to Thomas's point about all of the different levies that we have passed. On the left, those are all listed there with the effective year. And what's really interesting is the voted rate and how that changes over time. So, for example, I'll pick 2008. So in 2008, what was voted and passed by taxpayers is 7.7 mils, but what's actually being collected right now is 5.3. So that is reduced down because values have increased over time since 2008. Yeah.
So just to clarify, so when my property values go up, which they have in the last few years in Granville, I still pay the same amount in taxes and the school still collects the same amount?
Correct.
Okay, however, if my income my income goes up, which it has in the last couple, I get a raise, that I am contributing more to the schools then.
Yes, so that is slightly different because it does adjust with the economic conditions of your income, with the community's income. So as your income has gone up, you've paid potentially a higher dollar value, but it's still the same 0.75%.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, but that way, yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
And that is demonstrated too on the right. So this shows a few years of history of what we've actually collected in property tax revenue, as well as what we're looking at in the 5-year forecast period. So you might be looking at it going, okay, what conclusion am I supposed to draw here? Well, that it stays about the same. So the bars are all very flat there, and that's the takeaway. So just wanted to reiterate that because it is still, even with the income tax conversation, the property tax is still a majority of our revenue, so really important to understand this concept. All right, moving on to expenditures for the month of March. Really not a lot to say here. We're very much in alignment with where we were last year at this time. Year-to-date expenditures for salary and benefits are up slightly, and that's really due to our base salary increases, steps, and additional positions that we added due to enrollment growth. All other expenses include the HVAC projects that we've talked about and have largely used federal ESSER dollars to help offset as much operating expense as possible. But that overage is falling under that all other expenses line item. So that's a good transition then into COVID-related funds. And this is something that we talked a lot about really at the beginning of COVID and at the beginning of receiving all of the ESSER funds. But I wanted to throw up here really the exhaustive list of what you could use these funds for. And I've highlighted what we have used our ESSER dollars for. I show it on a pie graph every month and talk about this. But it is just really important to understand that these are restricted use funds. We do not have flexibility to use them for what we use our operating dollars for. So when it comes to salaries specifically, we are able to use them for learning loss. So intervention, summer school, we were also able to use them to add additional teaching positions when we had the need for social distancing and needed to reduce some class sizes, accommodate online classes. We were able to add those positions. So when it comes to salaries, that's what we were able to use COVID-related funds for. As I mentioned, we also used them for HVAC projects, as well as flooring. So allowing our facilities to be easier to clean was an allowable use. In the beginning, wipes. We bought a ton of wipes. Cleaning supplies were huge. That was what we needed in the beginning. So PPE, cleaning supplies, those kinds of things were also a big piece of how we spent our funds. So again, showing it a little bit different format. As a reminder, this is how we spent almost our $3 million in funds. But they all fall under those allowable uses. We are required to submit a budget each year, and we actually have to identify which allowable use all of these funds fall under each year. And there's a ton of auditing and ODE report after ODE report of how we've spent those funds to make sure that it all is in alignment with the allowable uses. Just as a reminder too, that compared to Licking County school districts, we received the lowest amount, and that's really the state minimum because there was a state supplement that brought districts up to a certain per pupil allocation. for all the COVID-related funding. And then even in our Central Ohio comparison districts, we're at the bottom end in that group as well. So while some other districts had flexibility, had more flexibility in how they spent their funds because they had more funds to spend, we did not have that luxury like some other school districts did. So how we are spending our remaining funds, we have some set aside for summer intervention. We have the elementary temporary intervention position that we'll be able to maintain through next year. And we have a few funds left for the behavior specialist that we'll be able to use up out of IDEA specifically. Okay, any questions on that before I move into cash reconciliation? Okay, so cash reconciliation, usually just kind of gloss over this. This is really an audit requirement. You heard Scott Brown talk about the cash reconciliation requirements for the audit and all that, so this is what goes into all of that. But behind the scenes of the cash reconciliation, I wanted to talk a little bit about an investment update, specifically as it relates to Red Tree, because we do have a significant amount of funds invested there, and just wanted to give you an update on where we stand there. So I will not pretend to be an economist or investment expert or really try to comment in any sense about where we stand in the economy, but I can show you the yield curve and tell you that where we stand most currently, which is the yellow line there on the top, is not right. So you should not be earning more on short-term investments than you do on long-term. And that's I really wanted to highlight that because it does play into our numbers specifically when it comes to Star Ohio versus our funds with Red Tree. So the way that this yield curve is trending right now is indicative of a recession potentially coming down the pipe. But the important thing to note is that it's not normal and it shouldn't last that long. So rates will normalize. We will go back to a state of longer term investments, earning a higher rate, hopefully in the future. So why that's important, specifically for us and where we have our funds invested, is because of Star Ohio. So Star Ohio is a pooling investment program in the state. School districts, municipalities can all participate in that, but it's very short term. So those are very, very short term investments, and that's at about 5% right now. That is incredibly high for Star Ohio. And that is comparing to almost 4% for Red Tree. So you're like, well, why do we have money with Red Tree if you can just put it in Star Ohio at 5%? Well, a year ago, even 4 months ago, those numbers were opposite. So Red Tree was earning significantly more than Star Ohio, and that's why we have money with Red Tree, because this is their day-to-day job. They're in this every day and know where it's best to invest. So the good thing, though, is that we do have money in Star Ohio as well. So we are able to capture some of that return on investment and capitalize on that 5%. Since we are at our high point in cash through the year, so it's actually kind of good timing. We have actually a majority of our funds at Star Ohio right now. And then a significant amount with Red Tree that they're managing for us. And then NBC Securities is a local group that we have had since I've been here and before that as well. That's at about 3%. So this gives you just an overall picture that I think we are capitalizing as much as we possibly can during the current economic condition, given our cash and financial situation. So we're making the best out of it, utilizing the investment tools that we have available to us, which I recognize is not a lot. So we are very restricted due to law and our policy and what we are able to invest in. So somebody at home may be looking at this going, well, I can get a lot better return than that. Obviously, these are public funds, so we are restricted in what we can invest in. Okay. I feel like I just ran a marathon with 17 financial slides, but any other questions or comments?
That was your aerobic monthly report,
Yes.
right? really like the 20 or 15 years of history and 5 years of future, because I think it just puts in context a little bit better, you know, the situation that we're in, and to realize the fact that, like, there is a levy cycle, right? And that's why cash balance goes up and down, and things like that. And we try our best to run incremental property tax levies only every 5 years, so that, you know, normal inflationary growth doesn't every year cause an increase, and the community is engaged in that process, right? And so I think that's very healthy that we have that, and great that we have these great tools to be able to see and understand things, so that's great.
Thank you.
I appreciate the detail and the explanation of how ESSER funds can be used, how the property tax, I think that's very helpful to me and to the community, so thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, these are not easy concepts to grasp. And it's even harder to explain in a 10-minute presentation. It's even harder to explain in a 2-minute presentation or just in slides on our website. So I also always welcome a conversation from any follow-up with questions or anything like that. I'm happy to go into more detail on any of these topics.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We've reached time in our agenda where we welcome public comments. Anyone is welcome to step to the microphone, state their name and address, and speak for up to 5 minutes. Seeing none here in the room, I will remind everyone that we welcome public comments by email or phone, or anytime. You're welcome to contact one of the board members or the administrators to help answer your questions. Thank you. Next on the agenda is our board discussion, starting with the comprehensive plan.
Sure. I'd like to provide the board a little bit of an update. At our last strategic planning meeting, Herb Kohler, our village manager, gave an update about the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan is a joint venture between the village and the township that talks about land usage and what type of economic development and community Granville wants to have at large, so to speak. And so Herb and Brent are kind of going on a roadshow, Brent Bird, are going on a roadshow to kind of talk a little bit about that process. They're open to getting feedback. Right now is the feedback process timeframe. So if people are interested in looking at that document, go to the Granville Village website and look at the comprehensive plan, and you can provide feedback to those entities. But one thing specifically that is a byproduct of the comprehensive plan, but also of conversations that this board has had with the community and the elected officials, is called a JED. A JED is a Joint Economic Development District, which is a way to potentially fund public infrastructure through, you know, an overlay district that creates revenue stream for infrastructure improvements and then economic development. And I think Maria did a fantastic, Maria, was that you? Okay, I thought so. Did a fantastic job recently in the Newark Advocate of highlighting, you know, why that's important. And the JED language is crafted. It's going through editing processes between the village and the township. And we are involved in those conversations as an entity that receives taxation from different entities. So, you know, I think the point to highlight to this board is the collaborative nature of that process. And as we get closer to a JED being finalized, you know, at some point I'll bring you more of a formal presentation about the implications of a JED district. You'll also hear a CRA language, that's a community reinvestment area. And that is also related to taxation. So again, different ways to develop and spur economic development, which, you know, we have an interest in cultivating the commercial base to offset the residential tax burden. But this is one of the mechanisms to spur that growth. Okay, just wanted to provide that update.
I had an opportunity to hear the roadshow myself and so forth, and get a review of the plan. And I encourage everybody to go out to the website of the village and kind of look at that and see what that comprehensive plan looks like. And I'll tell you, in many ways, it looks similar in terms of some of the land areas that are defined and our desired outcome in terms of maintaining the character of our community while kind of attempting to grow. In the past, I haven't seen the motivation or the action associated with the growth that I've heard the community wants. Now it's coming, right? And in the past, you know, like King County had to go out and recruit businesses to come here. Now they're coming and knocking on the door. So it's especially important that we have the mechanisms in place, like the JED, which are actively being worked on right now instead of just talked about, to be able to address those needs and ensure that we can grow when the companies that want to come relocate here and contribute to our property values in a commercial sense move forward. But I will say it's still very important for community members to be involved, right? You know, when there are conversations about the JED or about companies relocating here, to make your voice known about what you feel about commercial development and how we should do that responsibly as a community.
And I think it's important because we've received comment about, you know, why we aren't cultivating economic development. That's not necessarily the role of the school board.
Yeah.
We don't extend utilities, we don't extend water and sewer. That's not in our sandbox. But we are a partner with the entities that do. And we try and do it in a way that is advantageous to the aggregate tax base.
Right.
That was gonna be my question. So who else, are there other entities involved? I've heard village, township,
Yeah.
sometimes people don't realize that the schools are involved.
Yes.
What about the chamber and,
Yeah, so the chamber, Denison,
Yes.
Granville Schools, the GRD,
yes.
the township, the village, and that's it.
Yeah, oh, great, those are the ones that were on my list, so that's
Yeah.
perfect, yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
And there's some very high-level people as consultants as well that are drawn into that process, that are community members and so forth, like Bill Habig, who's an expert and a wizard on these kinds of things. It's been really involved, so I'm really excited. You know, people are kind of worried or have questions about growth and things like that, but I think it's gonna be fantastic for Granville. I don't exactly know what it's gonna be like, you know, 30 years from now, but we have people and plans in place to make sure that we retain the character. And I hope in the process can retain the quality of the schools as well. We know where there's going to be growth coming our way, but I think we have great plans, and the comprehensive plan update was presented to our strategic task force in the last month as well. And the strategic task force was able to kind of hear and understand that and see how it dovetails in with the growth that we expect from the schools. So I commend the village and township for putting that process together. So thanks. Anything else on the growth that you've heard recently or on the comprehensive plan? Great.
Okay, the next item, community feedback. We wanted to put something on the agenda to give you the opportunity to ask, if you're getting community feedback, ask questions of us to provide factual information if necessary. So is there any community feedback that you would like us to develop, you know, information about, or deliver factual information, neutral factual information for the purpose of community consumption?
Yeah. But I think the number one question that I get and concern that I get from folks is property tax increases, right? And it's a really tricky formula, and it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways how Ohio funds schools through property tax. And people are very concerned that, you know, with a significant increase in home values, you know, you see that. You see your neighbor's house is selling for a lot of money, even though your house sells for a lot of money. They don't understand that that's not going to increase your property taxes. And I think we've said it, Brittany, you had a lot of great demonstration of that, but usually it takes me about 45 minutes talking with an individual, looking at their individual property tax bills to show that, like, over time, property values increase, you know, your neighbor's houses are selling for a lot, your house is worth a lot more, but your property tax rate reduces. And it just doesn't make sense why it works that way, unless you put yourself in the context of 1970s when there was high inflation and this was passed. But it's something we've lived with, and because we don't have to think about it very often, right? We kind of maybe like to forget or don't engage much in the process. So that's the biggest thing I've heard from a community feedback perspective is that challenge to understand that how that model works and why.
Yeah, I think, not relative to our own concerns for the Granville School District, but there was another great article in the Advocate over the weekend by Dave Weidig about the current state of schools pending House Bill 1. Have you received any feedback, Brittany or Jeff, specifically from your counterparts in other districts on their plans for potentially what he calls the devastation of House Bill 1 and recovering some of those revenue losses?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I think other districts in Licking County will probably be more hurt by House Bill 1 because they are on the 20 mil floor. So they will have a greater loss of revenue than we would under House Bill 1. So while it's alarming to us, we do have diversification of revenue because we have the income tax. We are, in a way, protected actually by the House Bill 920 effect, that those rates will, in that scenario, would actually increase as the values decrease. So I would say other districts are probably going to be hurt harder than we would. So there's a lot of advocacy happening at the state level by all of our state organizations. It's scary. I'm not sure that it's going to get passed in its current form because the bill sponsor did not intend for it to do what it is going to do, which I feel like is the major problem with it.
Remember, the why behind House Bill 1 is to get a reduction of the income tax at the state level. So they're trying to accomplish, a flat tax perspective. And there's multiple ways to go at that. But I think one of the ways advanced in House Bill 1 really kind of unravels a 50-year precedent of taxation, which has a ton of unanticipated consequences. And, or triggers that happen because of House Bill 920. And so I think once Legislative Service Commission articulated that 920 would trigger, that started a reimagining of what they could do in order to accomplish their flat income tax. So I think that is that why that everyone has to keep in mind. And so if you are going to reduce the income tax, you're going to have to pay for it some way. And so, it might not be House Bill 1, but it might be some other version. And so we have to keep tracking that, that issue. Because we have 3 revenue streams, and property tax used to be our stable environment. This is a little bit disruptive.
And I failed to give any update on the state budget as well, but the House is supposed to pass their version of the budget by the end of April, I think was I heard.
Their 2-year cycle.
Yeah, so, what could happen is, they provide all this great opportunity for people to advocate and whatnot on House Bill 1, and then go and shove some version of that into the state budget that does not allow for the public to comment, so.
And if you remember, we're at the end of the 2 years of the 3-year phase, or 3-year, actually 6-year phase, because it's a 2-year budget.
3-year budget.
Yes, 3-year budget. So when we created the Fair School Funding Formula, which actually puts a number to the payment that we receive from the state formula versus residual budgeting, we used data from 2018. We called those the inputs. And those were actual data points on teacher salaries, bus driver salaries, all the factors that go into a funding formula. If you don't update the inputs, then your funding formula loses relevancy. And so what we're trying to do is advocate also for a school funding formula that the updates or the inputs are updated each new budget during the 6-year phase-in. And then also advocating for the next phase-in to occur. So it gets complicated, but we are pushing our advocacy efforts on the school funding formula. side of the equation. Any other questions? Okay.
Just real quick, I mean, this goes back to what we were talking, so I'm jumping back, unfortunately. But I did get a question about, just again, what is Granville doing about the development and potential growth outside of Granville Township? So how are we?
In Union Township within Granville Schools.
So Thursday night, Union Township is kicking off their comprehensive planning process. So I will be representing Granville Schools in the Union Township comprehensive plan process, so that we can look at, the factors of what they want to do with their land use that impacts our enrollment.
But largely, because of the agreement with Heath, defining potential annexation to higher density, we don't expect, I don't know what's going to come out of the comprehensive plan, right? But I would not expect there would be significant changes in the remainder of Union Township within Granville School Districts to land utilization or commercial development or anything along those lines.
I think the Heath non-annexation agreement definitely creates a tighter boundary. But the comprehensive plan, it really is a planning document for future land use. And so that can always be modified, so it's important to stay engaged in the process. Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Action agenda?
On to the action agenda.
Okay. Action item 10.01, board policy adoption. This is the second reading and approval of the board policies that OSBA is recommending to be updated. That motion?
So moved.
Second. Any other questions?
These are the ones we heard about last month. I
Yep.
think we understood then. So, the roll, please.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Ms. Deeds? Mr. Miller?
Aye, thank you. 10.02 is an agreement with The Ohio State University for student athlete mental health services.
So moved.
Second.
What I'd like to do is just take a moment to highlight that this is an action item related to a grant that Josh Duvall secured through a resident that was a $100,000 grant from a foundation, the Hillsdale Foundation. And Josh is going to come next month and present his strategic plan for the utilization of those funds. But Ohio State is going to be an active partner in that student-athlete mental health services equation.
That's fantastic. The total amount is $100,000?
Total amount is $100,000, and this will be fully funded by that grant.
Wow, fantastic.
I look forward to the presentation next month.
Yeah.
That's great.
And just to kind of clarify, for our non-athlete students,
Yes.
we have other services that we have a connection with. Guidestone.
Ohio Guidestone, that's correct. And our school counselors, and yes.
Okay, the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Mr. Miller?
Thank you. 10.03 is the annual renewal of our Global Scholars Diploma Program with the Columbus Council on World Affairs.
So moved. Second.
And just to reiterate that this program is a split cost, so half of the cost associated is done through a student fee to participate. And Jeremy Hopping does an excellent job as our facilitator of this program. Shout out to Jeremy.
That is a fantastic program for all the students that can participate in it. And they return to more in-person
They
days
have.
and things like that with companies and so forth.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's so cool.
Not as much with companies, but with the other entity or other school districts involved. So
Yeah,
we get the cultural benefit of that experience.
that's fantastic. Great. Questions? Yeah, the roll, please.
Ms. Deeds? Ms. Shaw? Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Okay, the next item is 10.04, agreement with Harvard Maintenance for custodial services.
So moved. Second.
And this one might need a little bit of an explanation. Currently, our provider, it provides custodial maintenance and ground services. We went out to bid and we bid those independently. And so our custodial award winner is Harvard. We are currently under contract through this summer with ABM, but we will be switching providers and looking forward to a relationship with Harvard moving forward. Grounds and maintenance are going to be hopefully brought in-house through an agreement with the association. So more to come on those two service providers.
Thanks for going through this process. Keeping our buildings under control and our grounds under control is really important. It's great that we went back out to bid, right, both from a performance perspective to make sure that we're meeting the standards so that we can have a great educational environment, as well as from a fiscal responsibility perspective, that we go through this bid process to do it responsibly for the community. So that's just what we needed to do. Yeah. This is a 2-year contract. Nope.
3-year.
Thank you. Good.
But what we will say is, throughout that process, we realized, the rate of inflation is hitting some of these contracts. And so we are starting to see how inflation is creeping into some of the contracts that we are starting to secure.
And not only cost inflation, the challenge with finding employees,
yes,
right, which is impacting all companies and organizations of all sorts and things like that. I know ABM's been challenged with that in the past, and I'm hopeful that our standards with Harvard are clear enough that we'll be able to get the service that we need to keep our buildings great for education.
Yes. And if I haven't said it, if you have a CDL and want to drive a bus, please contact our office. We are accepting applications. I feel like I have to say that as a monthly PSA. So, roll please.
Mr. Cronk.
Aye.
Mr. Wolf.
Aye.
Ms. Dees. Aye. Ms. Shaw. Aye. Mr. Miller.
Aye. Consent agenda, 11.01A through D, but remember we also have C7 as part of the addendum.
So moved.
Second. I'd like to call your attention. I want to call your attention to 2 retirements. Kim Clary, our transportation supervisor, who's been with the district for over 27 years, is retiring effective July 1. Kim has done a masterful job at working with very challenging environments and routes to provide the service that we provide for transportation. And that gets more and more challenging every single day. So we're going to miss her tremendously. And Yvonne Hammonds has also had a very long tenure in Granville Schools, and we wish her all the best and thank her for her service. And we'll miss her next year as well, but understand she's ready for the next chapter. And then item 9 is the non-renewal of all non-teaching supplemental contracts for the 2022-2023 school year. So remember, that is our annual non-renewal of all supplemental contracts. Those are 1-year contracts. We then rehire them throughout the year, the following year, for those additional contracts. Any questions?
I was excited to see that we're hiring a new bus driver, but then saddened on the next page to see that we're losing one as well.
Correct. Yes.
With appreciation of service though as well, and also I'd like to point out the addendum.
Yes, and I would also like to say thank you to Kathy Frank. Kathy was the building secretary at GHS and then moved into the school counseling department. She has been a fantastic person within our organization, very structured and organized, and kept us all in line. We'll miss her definitely for graduation. She kind of ran the show for graduation and with the support of all the other staff, but we are definitely going to miss her. So that, with much appreciation of her service to the schools.
I spoke to her today and invited her to attend graduation again, just as a kind of a reminder.
Good call.
Like that and keep us in line. So it's.
In addition to all her work activities, she was also the Key Club advisor.
Any other questions or things that came up on that part of the agenda? The roll, please.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Dees?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Thank you.
Okay, short and sweet tonight. Item 12.01, approval of the March 2023 financial report. So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions or comments?
Congratulations, a well-deserved award. I think that speaks volumes to how the treasurer's office works. So congratulations.
And I will just say that I asked how many entities received the award, which Scott didn't mention, but they audit over 6,000 different entities and 4% received the award annually, so.
And I think we kind of get sort of just used to it here, because we've had fantastic fiscal responsibility and things like that, because that kind of number, like there's 4% of all the organizations that receive it, that really speaks to our attention on that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate you.
And great job on all the extra charts and details and things like that to make clear the facts. You know, I would encourage anybody that has financial questions at all, reach out to Brittany directly. She's great at explaining at whatever level, the situation in our schools. So, thank you.
Thank you.
The roll, please.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Cron?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.